So back during the Depression, it was very difficult for anyone to purchase a home. The federal government was trying to jumpstart the economy. So they created different federal agencies with the intent of trying to get more people to get more mortgage money. But the rules were set up in a way that favored white people, wealthier people, and put the burden on people of color and people with less money. One of these agencies was the Homeowners Loan Corporation. During the 1930s, they went to different neighborhoods around the United States, and they made these color-coded maps where they rated different neighborhoods according to risk. If it was a good risk for a neighborhood investment, it got colored green. If it was a bad risk, it was considered a red neighborhood. Now, the federal government didn't just look at whether the houses were built out of brick or lumber. They looked also at who lived there already, the social composition of those neighborhoods. And many investigators have shown that if the neighborhoods had residents who were African American or people who were living on federal assistance, those areas got lower ratings than comparable neighborhoods by mostly white people. So HOLC loans were one thing that showed the intent of the federal government to favor primarily suburban, wealthier neighborhoods for federal investment in home mortgages. A second federal program that had a greater impact but didn't have catchy colored maps was the Federal Housing Administration, or FHA. FHA had sort of a guidelines in its application process about who could apply for a loan and who would be granted a loan. And if you looked at these underwriting guidelines, as my students and I have shown in the On the Line book chapter, you'll see that FHA actually gave a better rating to people who were getting mortgages in predominantly all white neighborhoods that were in growing suburban areas. If the neighborhood had different racial groups living together, that actually was a negative check. Even if we'd call it like an integrated neighborhood today, that was a negative marker in the eyes of the federal government, and you were much less likely to get a federal loan. So those are two types of federal programs, HOLC redlining maps and FHA underwriting mortgage policies that shaped a lot of the segregation we see in metropolitan Hartford today. Where you live shapes what kind of schooling you have, and vice versa. The kind of schooling you have largely determines where you can afford to live. So that interrelationship is really important to understand.
74% of students in the 8th grade in 1989 needed assistance with remedial reading. To me, that 74% is not a people number, that's a system number. If you have that many people failing in a organized system, then something is wrong with the system.
The legislative process was not going to lead anywhere, that it was really important to bring a school desegregation lawsuit against the state. The trends were too powerful to address politically. We were very intentional about developing what we called a tri-ethnic case with both African American and Latino and white families and kids, and also not just families from the city of Hartford, but also suburban families participating, because they were harmed by segregation in the region as well. So we had a sense that we wanted a more inclusive group of plaintiffs, but the individual plaintiffs themselves sort of emerged out of the community outreach we were doing.
Milo was used to social justice advocacy. He has a justice seeker for a mom, so marches on Washington, candlelight vigils, writing letters, all of that he was already accustomed to because he was my son, or is my son. And we talked about the injustice that was occurring at that time, and I asked him if he would consider participating in this suit. And he said yes.
My parents got involved when I was 3 years old. I was signed on as a plaintiff with the expectation that I would be able to see the beginning and end of the case. They also signed my siblings up, my brother and my sister, Woldeliz Bermudez and Pedro Bermudez, with that same hope.
In the many meetings that he attended with other parents, they realized, hey, there's a real problem here.
And our family, I have a daughter, Rachel, who was then 6, and a son, Joseph, who was then 4. I volunteered because I knew it was coming, and I'd been thinking about it for a long time, and this was an opportunity to take part in an action to address what I long thought of as one of the worst problems in American civilization.
When we took a class field trip to a suburban school while I was in high school, and we did like a one-day exchange program, and I said, wow, this suburban school has tons of more resources. It has a functioning library, it has a bunch of extracurricular activities, and my school does not.
So that was the fundamental claim, that these educational harms and inequities violated that provision of the state constitution, which is the right to education combined with the right to equal protection under the state constitution. We also had a claim that the discrimination clause of the state constitution banned the sort of de facto segregation in the Hartford schools, and we also had a claim that the state's failure to address this problem violated the students' rights to a minimally adequate education.
When I attended Hartford Public High School, all 4 years that I was there, my high school was on the verge of losing its accreditation. So that meant that as a senior, can you imagine being in a position where you're trying to apply for college and you don't even know if your actual credits for your high school have been valid or not?
We don't think the Constitution has been breached in any way by the state because the state hasn't contributed to or caused the problems that are at the basis of the lawsuit.
The plaintiffs disagree.
And if the Constitution says everyone is entitled to a free public education on an equal basis, then the state has to provide it. The state can't come up with an excuse saying why they aren't able to do it or why it isn't their fault. They have to do it.
Well, it was, of course, extremely disappointing. However, I truly think that through all the trial, it seemed as though Judge Hammer understood the complexity and the need to provide quality integrated education. Where his ruling came from, I think might have been a cocktail party when somebody said to him, hey, but you don't really want to do that. That's my fantasy, is why he changed and switched so drastically from what I saw in his body language, in his facial expressions in the courtroom. Bottle of champagne, it was like, how horrible can you be? Celebrating in that manner so publicly the defeat of children's constitutional rights, right? Because that's basically, Sheff is based on the state constitution. So this is it's an education suit, but it's based on constitutional rights. So people tend to forget that. I mean, our children's constitutional rights are violated because of the racial, ethnic segregation of their school system. I believe the next day we marched to the Capitol. Whoever lost at that Superior Court level was going to appeal.
I think that after the experience of being denied at the Superior Court level by Judge Hammer, I think that I personally was perhaps less confident that the Supreme Court would respond favorably. Needless to say, we were jubilant that we won by a single vote.
Discrimination can be said to be intentional, and segregation can be said to be de facto. And because we did, under the federal law, you would have had to prove discrimination, an intentional act. Under the Connecticut Constitution, we said you did not have to do that, and in fact, the Connecticut Supreme Court agreed with that.
Thoughts rested purely with the rights of the children. So I celebrated and continue to celebrate the support for our children's constitutional rights.
I think what I received was a really unique experience, and one that absolutely supported my development as a well-rounded student, because I did have those opportunities to interact with students that were not necessarily from my same background, socioeconomically, culturally, didn't live geographically in the same places I did, and so I was able to learn from them in a way that I think is unique to the magnet school experience.
At the end of the day, I would say my interaction with the magnet setting was a wonderful one. One that made me more prepared for college, more cognizant of what I needed to study and what classical studies meant in my life. And then I also had the opportunity to be in an art high school where I first started with writing and then moved on to theater, which is an opportunity that I would have never had in a normal school setting, especially here in the Hartford school system.
The definition of a magnet school is a school that is regional in nature and offers, targeted programming or specific programming to attract students from a variety of towns in order to reduce racial isolation and to provide a rigorous experience for all students.
Well, like I said before, I went to a Catholic school, and it was mainly just all white. There was no diversity at all, like not just through people's race, but just everyone kind of like you had to fit this mold to fit in. And I feel like coming here, there is no mold. Everyone is so diverse and so different in so many ways that it's just a lot easier to fit in here and have a lot of different friends.
Here at Connecticut River Academy, everything is really geared towards sustainability. So we have like a certain, flavor to our school. We have a wide range of courses that deal with the environment, and there's a variety of animals that we're taking care of. This is where we'll do some experimenting with hydroponics, and we also have like a food systems class.
My favorite classes would have to be our Goodwin classes, where we can enroll into the college as basically college students and have the freedom and design to do what we want.
The school culture is extremely different than what I expected. Coming into high school, I think I was expecting more of like the stern laws and disciplinary practices. It was kind of different here, there was a lot more collaboration on behavior and academics as well, more close-knit relationships between the teachers and the students. So it was different as to the social breakdown of what I thought high school was supposed to be like.
Earlier in the year, we had this kind of activity that everyone came outside, and we just did chalk art out on the cement or whatever, and it was really cool. There was music, everyone was collaborating, and even people that you didn't know, they just treated you like you were already a good friend.
Choice is a program that allows Hartford resident students to apply and attend suburban public schools. These are not magnet schools. But it also allows suburban students to come in and attend participating Hartford public schools. The program started in 1966. It's a grassroots program started by a mom who was concerned about the educational system in Hartford, and with that grassroots, developed this program. Went through a lot of hard work talking with community members, parents, trying to get people on board. It finally was approved. It was funded by the City of Hartford, the Board of Education, and ran for many years.
The first day of me being in Farmington schools, I remember missing the bus. That was probably the worst thing, or not necessarily missing, but the way they did it back then, they had different buses, and you'd have to transfer from the North End Hartford bus to a separate bus going to Farmington, and then they were completely different companies, so they have to meet up at like some parking lot in a midway zone, which I believe was Parkville in Hartford, and you would wait there for 5-10 minutes and switch, and I just never ended up switching. So I ended up going to the high school bus, going to, I forget all the schools, Westwoods, Irving A. Robbins, ending up at the high school, and then the bus driver finally asked me, which school do you go to? And he drove me personally to East Farms, and I was the last kid to show up, so everybody was waiting for me. So that was just a big eye-opener that they sort of, as first graders seeing it now, they all waited for me to show up.
So I had a great experience. Once I got to middle and high school, I got on the track team, I was in choir, I was in international club, so I was very involved. And as a staff person of the program now, that's my encouragement to all the families. Get your children involved, because when you're involved in clubs and sports and things like that, you tend not to see race as much. It's about team building, supporting your teammates, and I think that is a great place for students to build community and be a part of the community.
Honestly, it's an eye-opening experience, because I come from a predominantly black town, and coming to a school or, coming to a town with a school that has, a mix of, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, you get to, know different people and learn different, experiences. So it's pretty cool.
And I always said that was, to me, the biggest benefit of this program. Not so much education and academics, but socially, developing yourself socially, that I can be comfortable being the only one that looks like me, no matter where I go, and hold my own, communicate with various different people.
First grade, there wasn't anything really big. Like, everyone was a kid. They didn't really understand the difference between segregation and stuff like that. So everyone just hung out with whoever was cool at the time. Everyone who had money, everyone who had like a little DS, something like that. Whereas in middle school, when things was a big part where stuff changed, is where like stereotypes would come, like questions would come, like, do you jump really high, stuff like that, or do you run fast? And everyone would be looking at me to, I guess, overperform in gym or athletic sports and stuff like that.
And I don't think it's right that I have to or anybody should put their child in a lottery and hope that they have a chance at a better education. Why do I have to hope for something? I should be guaranteed.